And hello, folks. Once again, we are going into the breach on a Friday night. It is 7 o'clock Central Standard Time. Once again, this is On My Mind with CR and Adrian. Adrian, you have been absent the last couple of episodes. Everything going all right?
Yeah, no, everything's going good. I just needed some time off and some things came up, and so we worked around it. So I want to thank Ryan Johnson for setting in on the one evening. I always like to listen to Ryan talk and just really appreciate it. So it's fun to be back tonight, especially because we have just an awesome person coming on, Anna Voight. But I'll let you talk about the next couple of times on the next two shows before we bring Anna on.
Sure. So, tonight, like Adrian was saying, tonight is about neurodiversity or neurodivergence. Um, and then next, we're actually not going to have a show next Friday. It's going to be next Thursday, and that's going to be with Father Lampert, who is a Catholic exorcist. Um, Mom was kind of spurred on that I got Darkness Dave on and wanted to one up me, and boy, did you ever one up me on this one. It's
Yeah.
going to be really interesting talking to him, hearing his stories, hearing about his training in Rome, and seeing what he's doing to further his training and keep going on that. And then the week after that will be July Friday 7th. My friend and high school classmate Michelle Lancel is going to come on and talk about it's titled Demon in My Apartment. I guess she lived in a place that um, had a ne'er-do-well attached to the apartment, and she's going to talk about living in the apartment and how she was able to get rid of said ne'er-do-well in that apartment. So those are the next two. So like I said, this coming Thursday will be 7 o'clock, and then that Friday the 7th will actually be at 6 o'clock.
Okay.
But we'll let everybody know, and I think we've got those. I'll have to do a couple of teasers for the Demon in My Apartment, but I put out some teasers for Father Lampert's episode this past week. So, and another way that folks can see us is um, if you join um, our Facebook page, which is Shortwave Media Presents On My Mind podcast with Adrian and CR, or CR and Adrian. And then if you go to YouTube, it's On My Mind podcast with CR, and you'll find us there. So you'll find all of our previous shows and all of our teasers. And if you follow us, you'll get those teasers coming up on your Facebook feed. Well, I think what we're going to do, and I was talking to Adrian about this earlier, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop on the co host bandwagon and let Adrian take the reins on this. What do you feel about that, Adrian?
Well, I feel really good about that.
Okay.
So see if I can find Anna. I'll let you bring Anna on.
Sure. All right. With further ado, here is Anna.
Anna, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on. Everyone, this is Anna Voight. And the first thing that I put on the slide is amazing Anna, because I work with Anna and she is such a delight in terms of just being a caring person and making a positive difference in my lives and in the lives of other people. She is our associate director of student life at Dakota County Technical College. She is, I want to say, most proudly, I can call her a friend. She's one of those people that I could call at 9, 10 o'clock at night if I felt I were in a crisis, or as I've told her with my own neurodiversity, sometimes I can't figure something out and I just need to talk to her. So Anna, thank you so much.
Well, Adrian, thanks for those kind words. Thanks for having me today, Adrian and CR. It's a pleasure to
You're
be
welcome.
here with you all, and especially to talk about neurodiversity and our journey with that. So thanks for having me.
No problem.
Absolutely. And one of the things that amazed me about you, and I didn't even know this because I thought I was a little bit of an anomaly, but the average age that somebody gets diagnosed is 30. And so I was just wondering if you could tell us when you got diagnosed, what the journey is a little bit. But maybe before we get into that, and one of the things, Anna, that you remind me of is to talk about what does the term neurodivergent mean. So neurodivergence is like a large umbrella. And Judy Singer, we really need to credit her. And she was, I want to say, an Australian psychiatrist, but out of a lot of writing and a lot of research on this is from other countries. And neurodivergence is a newer term. Thank goodness, because when I was young, there were a lot of really negative terms, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But as Singer says, people with neurodivergence, it's an assortment of people with a range of conditions like Asperger's, which is in the autism category, autism, ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and then she has this etc. So, CR, do you mind if I share what your neurodivergence is called?
No, go right ahead.
It's septo-optic dysplasia, and it's also closely related to optic nerve hypoplasia. My point in saying this is we can't count them all, the neurodivergence, it's really a different way that our brains work. And it can be seen at times on an MRI, like on CR's MRI. You can see it on my MRI. You can't see my neurodivergence. So it's always not manifested physically, but in CRs you can see the optic nerve is damaged and the different areas of the midbrain that are impacted. But these differences, disorders, they're as vast and probably more complex and unique than our fingerprints themselves. And so what they're saying, and the thing that has amazed me with Anna, talking with Anna and the journey, is that there are a lot of people that are probably walking around, never felt really different, but never knew why, and probably haven't gotten diagnosed. But the thing is, that brain, that is not what we say neurotypical. It's divergent. It's different. Our brains work differently.
Mhm.
Also they have many strengths, and employers are finding that out. Society is finding that out. We're finding out that the people who have language difficulties like dyslexia are most creative. Employers are finding out that sometimes you can get the productivity of 1.5 to 2 people out of somebody who's neurodivergent, right? Especially if they can hyper focus or they get in their area of interest. And so it's very exciting as we work with adults at the college to be able to celebrate neurodiversity and
Well,
really make it a positive thing.
there's also the flip side of that. I'm going to dance around it kind of carefully here because I don't want to make anybody mad. But the last job I was at, and usually when a neurodivergent or neurodiverse person is working, that's the thing. They can conquer more. They can, if they're in their niche, they can do really good things. But on the other side of that, there's a lot of struggles because of that. And um, a lot of problems that I had. Not only do I have problems with SOD and endocrine issues, but I have fibromyalgia, and we've been working through that. Well, I worked for a company for 2.5 years, and they just let me go this spring because the manager or supervisor didn't want to work with somebody with that disability. They were tired of um, excuses. They were tired of, figuring out how they needed to work with it. And they really didn't work with my job coach all that close. So, I mean, there is that problem there. But like you were saying, the majority of the time, it really behooves a company to have someone who is now neurodiverse
Well,
on their staff.
and I think it's nice, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because there is a lot of trauma, both in somebody's history of school system or growing up and having struggles academically, but also in the workplace. And we are so far from where we need to be. And the other thing that this brings up is that I am far from an expert, and none of us here that are talking tonight are experts, but we're here to share our own experiences. And then hopefully this will help listeners as well. So if you're listening and you have a question, go ahead and type it in, and we will do our best to answer that.
Either type it in or feel free to call. There's a ticker on the bottom of the screen with the studio number. After you call the studio number, hit option number 1, and I am actually standing by the switchboard now, and I will hear your call as soon as it comes in. Or on the other side, I'm also monitoring our comments. So if your comments come in, I will do my best to get it aired and get your question answered tonight.
Great. So as I mentioned, a lot of organizations in the UK, there's one in Britain called DANDA, and they talk about this huge makeup of neurodiversity, and they gave some of the examples we talked about. This like sensory difficulties, sensitivity, light, noise, touch, temperature, speech and language difficulties. These are underneath some of those many different learning issues, and not everybody has them. Not every autistic is going to have this necessarily. I mean, they commonly have sensory difficulties, but not necessarily everyone's going to have the same one or the exact same symptoms. The other thing that really differs is severity or functioning level. So you can have somebody who has a lower severity of some of these challenges, have a little better function level in the workplace. And CR, I think that's what hit you, is that you have an immune condition that really impacted your job and your ability to be there when you needed to be. And so
and that came off, and if you're not, as a supervisor, if you're not aware of these things, it looks to you like you have an employee that doesn't want to work and they don't care.
And that's the whole question of, should somebody disclose to their employer, that we can probably talk about tonight. That's a very complicated, complicated decision as well.
Well, and I'm going to tell you on my side, I see it a benefit when I'm in an interview to disclose with employers, because I haven't before, and it has bit me on the rear end. So, it's kind of a darned if you do, darned if you don't thing.
Yes, for sure. So Anna, when did you find out about your neurodiversity, and what is your neurodiversity? If you could talk about that.
Sure. So currently my diagnosis is autism spectrum disorder level 1. So what that means is that I require support, but it's not as substantial. So a lot of people are familiar with the terms like Asperger's or autism spectrum disorder, high functioning, low functioning, and those are actually all starting really be more outdated terms now. So with the DSM-5, Asperger's actually is kind of, that whole diagnosis went away, and now it's all call autism spectrum disorder, and it's either level 1, level 2, or level 3. So if it's a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder level 1, that requires support. Autism level 2 would be requiring substantial support, and level 3 would be very substantial support. So now kind of support needs, high support needs, low support needs, kind of replaces that verbiage of high or low functioning. So my diagnosis is autism spectrum disorder level 1 per the DSM-5. Also have generalized anxiety diagnosis as well. But prior to that, kind of where this all started, for years I've certainly struggled with anxiety. I've had that diagnosis. I've also had obsessive compulsive personality disorder diagnosis. That's kind of where it started when I started kind of recognizing I was having some challenges. I was thankful to have a supportive work environment, supportive supervisor, people around me that kind of helped navigate me towards getting some support in that area. So I've worked with a therapist for a while, and I've always suspected I have dyslexia. So dyslexia falls under that term of neurodiversity, neurodivergence. And I talked to my doctor about that, and they're like, well, as an adult, insurance actually doesn't cover the testing for that. So they had said, you're having troubles at work. Are you at risk of being fired? And I wasn't. So they're like, if you're not, probably doesn't pay to get tested, but if you find yourself having really significant challenges with that, right, then it might. So for many, many years, that's probably 10 years ago that I started strongly suspecting I had dyslexia. Never really had considered autism, even though there are members of my family that do have that diagnosis and have since childhood. So during COVID is kind of when it's resurfaced, and I noticed, again, kind of that dyslexia, some of the challenges I was having with that. As during COVID, we're on our computers more, relying a lot more on written communication. And I started finding kind of those challenges I have related to dyslexia really exasperating and getting worse, making more errors in my writing. So when I make errors, I'll type the same word twice. I'll forget words. I'll have common errors. And I don't necessarily catch those. So something most people don't know about me is in order to proofread, I actually really need to print documents and read a printed copy in order to catch my errors. If I read it on the screen, it's very hard for me. So kind of exploring dyslexia was my first exposure to that. So during COVID, I started noticing those symptoms really getting worse. So I started rethinking, I really want to look into getting tested for this. I really feel like my work performance is not where I would expect it to be. Even though I hadn't gotten that feedback, right? It's more a self-conscious thing. So I kind of revisited that with my, or I hadn't revisited it with the doctor. I started good old Google. I started Googling that again of what are some things I could try? What are some tips I could use? And as I started researching dyslexia more in depth, I learned via Dr. Google that dyslexia is co-occurring with autism quite often. So that was kind of a light bulb moment for me, because I'm like, oh, that runs in my family. That's interesting. I had never suspected that up until that point. So that's kind of when I started looking into autism a little bit more. And as I started doing that, I started realizing, wait, this sounds like me. That sounds like me. So kind of for the first time started suspecting that I might be autistic as well. And that was March of last year, so March 2022. That's kind of what started my journey. And then there's some colleagues that I have that had, made some comments or said some things I suspected they might have some knowledge about autism. So found some opportunities when interacting with those colleagues to share that I suspected I might be autistic, and was fortunate that they were very knowledgeable about the subject, had some resources for me, and really got me on the right track of finding someone who could do that diagnostic process, because what a significant challenge is actually getting a diagnosis for many reasons, one of them being wait lists. So I initially had, talked to my doctor about if I want to get tested for this, where do I go? Had gotten on some waiting lists, and they essentially said, yep, the wait list is 2 to 4 years long.
Wow.
Yes, quite a substantial wait list. Thanks to my colleague, they had recommended a place where they were able to get in sooner than that. And the other thing that I know we'll talk about more as well is autism in women presents very differently. And a lot of folks are not necessarily trained to identify it in women or to pick up on those differences. So for any women going through that process, it's very important to work with someone who has experience recognizing and diagnosing that in women. So I ended up, thanks to a colleague, got connected with that. That diagnostic process, I think from start to finish, ended up about 6 months from when I did the intake. Started with kind of a general meeting, lots of questionnaires, different things where they're kind of seeing, are there signs? Should we do the full testing? So I was 32 when all of that started, so actually a little older than average, just by a couple of years. So lots of questionnaires that went in, ended up also suspected some ADHD tendencies as well. So I ended up going through the process for both ADHD and autism. Ended up not being diagnosed with ADHD, but with that autism spectrum disorder level 1 diagnosis. And I don't know, Adrian, if you want me to expand any more on that, or I know talking about kind of the feelings on that, or if there's anything you want to interject.
Yeah, definitely. And even before I have you do that, I want to kind of unpack just a couple things like a lot of people know what dyslexia is, but it really is a difficulty with language, reading, writing, spelling, recognizing words, sequence. And the other thing that I wanted to mention was that everybody can have problems to some degree of some of these things, but it really gets into a diagnosis when you have a certain number of problems in a category to a certain severity, right? And that's why we need the professionals kind of there to work it out. Now, the other thing about being an adult is that you've obviously adapted over the years. You have done a lot of, without being diagnosed, you've had to make a lot of, you're an overcomer. You've had to overcome a lot. And so that's the other thing I wanted to say. But yes, please do go into that.
Absolutely. So kind of leading up to that diagnostic process, I kind of had my first meeting, the intake meeting, where you do a lot of questionnaires and they kind of see, like, is it worth doing the full testing? So I was about a month difference, and that month kind of leading up to the official testing, it was really scary. I was very anxious because it was just thinking about, do I really want to know the answer to this? Because if I am autistic, like, that's a label that never goes away. Like, autism isn't something that comes and goes. Like, if you're autistic, you're autistic. So if I were to get that diagnosis, like, that's with me for life, that label. So that really was a heavy weight thinking about that. But on the flip side, if I didn't have the diagnosis, what did that mean? Because I learned about autism. I'm like, wow, like, my life makes sense. So many of the challenges I've had, the things I've gone through, when looking at those things through the lens of what I now have been learning about autism, I'm like, this is the answer. Like, if I'm autistic, my entire life makes sense now. All these things that have been a struggle for me. So it was very hard, very scary. And I'd say it was just like back and forth for a whole solid month of, what if I am? What if I'm not? What if I am? And I multiple times I'm like, I should cancel the appointment. Like, I don't want to know. So it was a very, very scary and nerve-wracking process.
It's kind of hard to stick with it, I guess, in that regard. It would be, because it sounds a little bit, I mean, it sounds like a roller coaster.
Very much.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's a perfect description. But I'd say once I was actually there for the diagnostic process, I worked with an amazing person that really just put me at ease. And the actual process and the testing, it was hours long, but it was really a good experience. And kind of at the end of it, the diagnosing psychologist had asked me, well, Anna, do you think you're autistic? And I was like, yes, I think I do. And she was like, I do too. And this is why. And then she started really explaining kind of how I met the different criteria, what she was noticing, what she was seeing. And then at the same time, she validated and told me, like, why these traits about me were really good things and the benefits of these strengths and why these strengths make me an amazing person for those unique strengths and skills that I bring. So I just remember leaving that day, I think validated or feeling a sense of worth that I'd really never felt before, because I'd never had someone articulate these things about me in a good way. I'd always felt like, oh, these are the things that make me different. These are the things that make me weird, quote unquote, or right, that always I feel like I always have to hide because I don't fit
Mhm.
in. And for the first time, I had someone saying, this is who you are, and this is amazing. So it was after that, it was a huge sigh of relief, and just
Uh,
felt a weight lifted off my chest is how I would describe it after I got the diagnosis.
when you say hide, how did you do that? Is that like putting on a mask and
Sure.
pretending, or what is that like for you?
Sure. I know you referenced this a little bit to Adrian about kind of as an adult, you've kind of learned to cope, you've learned to fit in.
Mhm.
So a lot of times, with women especially, and one of the reasons why we don't necessarily get diagnosed as often is we're more likely to kind of observe things around us and be like, oh, this thing I'm doing is different than everyone else, so I need to do what everyone else is doing, whether that's communication or clothes we're wearing or how we interact with people or different
Mhm.
things like that. So I definitely say, in most social situations, I never really feel comfortable or at ease. I'm analyzing everything. What are people doing? What are
Mhm.
people saying? I need to like make sure I'm fitting in and copying what others are doing. It's really just feeling I have to copy what other people are doing in order to fit in different sessions or different scenarios. So yes, masking, camouflaging is another way for that. And that's one of the ways that a lot of times women and men are different is that women learn that skill and are able to kind of mask or hide that or fit in without it
Oh.
necessarily being noticed,
Mhm.
where men aren't as likely to do that masking, so it stands out more and they're more likely for that to be observed and to get a diagnosis.
See, Chris, I can't hear you now. CR, you muted?
Yeah, I was muted, but what I was saying is, I know what you mean there. Before my last job, I was a security officer for about 4.5 years, and I was pretty much, to my knowledge, the only one on duty at with those companies that had neurodiversity, and that was, I had to hide a lot of my tendencies, um, and kind of put on that mask of, um, I don't want it coming out, so I'm gonna do what everybody else is doing, to kind of be a protection.
Does that take, just from my experience, you pay some prices for that, right? CR? I mean, did it take a lot of energy or
It did, and it doesn't help that I was working second shift, so
Mhm.
I wasn't going in. Well, when I worked up in Minnetonka, I wasn't going in till probably 1:30, and I was not getting home till 11:30 midnight. So
Mhm.
that did take a lot of energy out of me.
Mhm.
Plus, that was a highly demanding job,
Mhm.
and it got scary sometimes.
Mhm.
Not exactly the first posting I was at, but the second posting I was at, uh,
Mhm.
it got down to the point where it just wasn't safe anymore for any of the officers at that.
For anyone, yeah.
When I quit there, I ended up wearing a bulletproof vest every day into work. Granted, I was not a police officer; I was a security officer, but I was wearing a bulletproof vest to work every day, and I just had to stand back. And I was like, and at that time, I had a detached retina that was uh, due to my SOD. So I was actually half blind doing this job, and I was just like, I can't do this anymore because it's not safe. Plus, if you hide it, and Anna, I don't know if this happens to you, but camouflaging it and hiding it for too long kind of ended in a breakdown of my coping mechanism.
For sure. It's interesting you say that, Chris. What I learned too, kind of in this journey, is I learned about something called alexithymia, which a lot of people with autism have, and it involves like more challenges with identifying either emotions that you're feeling or picking up on emotions
Mhm.
of others. And as I was researching this, kind of what I learned from one of the resources, Sarah Hendricks, if anyone follows her, she has great resources. So she talked about this as, if you think about emotions on a scale of 1 to 10, and like 1 is like really, really bad, you're doing terrible, and 10 is like life's great, it's amazing. Her point was, a lot of times people with autism or alexithymia, they feel if they're a 1 and they feel if they're a 10, but 2 through 9 is really just all the same or blah, or they really couldn't describe how they're feeling if they're kind of in there, and it's only if they're really good or really bad. I could really relate to that because I feel like, yes, so it's super interesting. So your point, CR, about kind of that burnout, or when you get to that point, what I've started learning is I don't necessarily pick up on like when I feel stressed or when I feel like things are getting too much and I might need to take a break from a feeling standpoint. So I'm currently working on now, like, how to identify those things before I'm, way far on the scale where it's almost too late to do anything about it. So I found my Apple Watch to be super helpful for that. That can track your resting heart rate. So that's something I do every day now. I check my resting heart rate as a way to check, am I being more stressed? If I am, what are other things I need to do to do that? I know one strategy for kind of alexithymia is like you've heard of, like the emotions wheel, where you like look at the wheel and identify the emotion you're feeling. Interesting thing is, like, when I do that, like I couldn't tell you what emotion I'm feeling. Like I wouldn't know. So if you're asking like, oh, Anna, how do you feel? I don't know. That'd be my response most of the time. So what I found helpful too is good old Amazon. There's kind of like the emotion wheel, but it has an added section which is thoughts. So it asks you what thoughts you're having, and then it shows emotions associated with those thoughts. So what I learned by kind of using that, so every day I'd kind of wake up and look at, like, what thoughts am I having? What does that correspond to? And I actually noticed most days I was calm and I was happy. And I had no idea because I didn't feel that way, but my thoughts and other factors were leading to that, which was completely eye-opening for me. So kind of learning about that has really helped me to recognize some of those warning signals that I don't naturally pick up on, so that I can more prevent that burnout. So since getting the autism diagnosis and learning about this, I've been able to be more steady and not have as many highs and lows of, like, being a workaholic and then crashing because I didn't manage my energy. And really what I've identified is I can't naturally manage my energy by feelings. I have to rely on other mechanisms to do that. And when I have those in place and rely on those, I can be more steady and not get to that point, Chris, right, where you're burning out and you're hiding it too much. And so for a lot of times as an introvert, that's saying no to a lot of social things and really saving that energy for the things I have to do. I have a very social job. I interact with people pretty much all day long. So at night, I don't interact with anyone. Weekends, don't interact with anyone. My social things are very limited. And I found that's really been a coping strategy for me and an essential part of my life in order to do the social job that I have.
I think that's huge. And, Cloud and Townsend are two psychologists that have the book called Boundaries. And it took me many, many years to be able to get some boundaries. And I still have issues with that, where I want to do so much and I really would like to grow in this area, grow in that area. But if I get myself, because I am an introvert, if I get myself over involved, I'm very unhappy. I mean, I don't know if this may sound really funny to some people who are going everywhere with their hair on fire, but like, if I have 2 meetings in a day, I have to work, because I do a lot of remote work and a lot of teaching and instruction. But in addition to that, from working with my students, and I love all that, it's my passion. But in addition to that, if I have like a lot of meetings that week or several meetings in a day, I have to like work myself up mentally. It's like, I don't know what it is, but it's the social aspect of it. But then I need time to come down. And so it's almost like, you have the work up to the meeting, you have the meeting, and then you have to come down from the meeting, and then you have to, and I thought I was such a freak about that until I started understanding a little bit more about neurodivergence, a little bit more about introversion, and how you cope with those things, how you do the planning, how you think about it differently, and part of what I think I hear you saying is giving yourself permission.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, stop judging, like,
Mm-hmm.
stop judging so harshly.
Yep. Yes, it's interesting you say that, Adrian. So a couple points on that. Yes, that's actually something, self-compassion. That's something I've been learning about recently. Um, So you mentioned kind of the meetings. I can relate to that as well, but more in the stance of just the amount of time it takes my brain to process things. So kind of leading up to a meeting. If I'm going into a meeting, I don't know what to expect. If there's not an agenda, I don't know what the purpose is. Those types of meetings are extremely stressful for me because I don't know what to expect. I don't know what to prepare. So it's super helpful for me if I know the purpose of a meeting, if there's an agenda, if there's stuff I need to be prepared to talk about. I like to know that in advance so I can come prepared. And then two, after the meeting, it's kind of processing what happened, what did people say, am I interpreting that right? Because what I've noticed about myself now too, the more I learn about neurodiversity, is one-on-one, I can communicate much better than in a group. And I've learned that I think the reason for that is I'm only having to process what one person is doing. And every time you add a person to that, it really complicates it. As I didn't realize everyone didn't do this. So if I'm having a conversation with you, Adrian, let's say, my brain is thinking about a lot of things at the same time. So I'm processing what you're saying. I'm processing the tone of what you're saying. I'm processing your body language. I'm processing all these things about you. And then I'm simultaneously processing those same things about me. What is my body language? What is my tone? What are my facial expressions? What am I saying? Right? Because I'm having to process all this
Mm-hmm.
and know the appropriate response. And then I'm thinking about what you're saying, and then my immediate reaction. But then I know like my immediate reaction might not be appropriate, so I have to think about how do I phrase this in the right way, right? So I'm processing about
It's
10.
exhausting. Exhausting.
Yes. Yes.
I
I'm
would
processing about
think.
10 things, right? Just in a one-on-one conversation. And then for every person you add to that, it's like 5 more things that I'm having to simultaneously process. And it's really exhausting for my brain. And now that I'm understanding that, it's helping me better manage my energy
Mhm.
and those meetings and commitments like that.
Hypervigilance.
Hmm.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, too, because I think sometimes where I think of hypervigilance with myself is, yes, that is a hypervigilance, and you have multiple things going on in you. But then I also think that some of my hypervigilance is from trauma as in childhood, trauma in school. And I don't think anybody I'm not saying anybody particular traumatized me, but the poor grades, the struggles, the trying to understand why you were different, never being diagnosed. Sometimes that's a good thing. A lot of times that's not a good thing, right?
Hmm.
And fortunately, I was able to find my niches, what I love to do, because that was really, books were my rescue. Even though I had the language disorders, the reading difficulties, once I was able to get beyond some of that, books and literature really saved me, because I had the dyscalculia, the math problems, really severe. Um, I can do math pretty well now, up to a certain grade level, like uh, but when it gets to college level, I struggle. And so, um, in terms of coding, medical coding is what I teach. I'm really great with all of that, estimating, centimeters, all of the metric system. Um, but struggling as a young child, and what always put a terror into me was a timed test. And every time we did addition, subtraction, multiplication, grade school, there was like a 3-minute timer with so many questions. I could never make it. And I got to be like a deer in the headlight, just like, so yeah,
Yeah.
hypervigilance. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think comes sometimes because you have that difficulty. You're like always on guard,
Right.
like
Yep.
you are hyper about being vigilant. What's going on? Who's doing what?
It's
Well,
interesting. I was
go
going to
ahead,
say,
Anna.
Adrian, it's interesting you say that. So as I was going through my diagnostic process, they do all of these different tests, and within some of that, we did some like IQ testing and things like that. And one thing the diagnoser shared with me is every test that involved a timed component, where I had like you have a certain amount of time to do it, there was a direct correlation. I did those were the ones I did the worst on when there was that time
Mhm.
component and added, I think, a level of anxiety, and I did not perform as well on those. So it's really interesting that you mentioned time, because I definitely have that same component.
Yeah, it was interesting that you mentioned the dyscalculia, and I horrible with math, to the point where I'm probably a mid, maybe fourth, fifth grade level math. But I remember when I was applying to DCTC in 2018, 2019, part of the onboarding is you have to take a timed test. So they go through and they do English and all these different sections, and then one of them was math. And with the not only with the dyscalculia, but put on changed to that time frame. I did horrible in the math, and they wanted me to do a remedial math course, which that went over like a lead balloon. The both colleges that I have gone to, both Normandale and DCTC, I've had to be in a remedial math class, and the Normandale math class was horrible because all he did was he never taught anything new. You had a workbook and you did maybe a chapter or a couple of pages. And when you went into class, all he did was review the answers to those in a monotone voice. And there was no teaching or, well, you got this wrong. Let's step through it. But there was all of that at DCTC. I forget her name, but the instructor I had was wonderful. It's just when I learn something, it's I have to see it multiple times. And then in order for me to do it, I have to be walked through. Hold my hand, show me how to do it. And then each time that I do it, pull the training wheels off just a little bit until I start grasping it, until I can do it. But unfortunately, in a college setting, in that type of class, they don't have the time that they maybe had in a grade school or a high school setting that they could have done.
Yeah, and I think that is a good point, that recognizing what the needs are, being able to identify them, but also then what are some outside the box options for people, because I can't think of a worse thing if you're struggling to be put in a group full of people and not have that individual, help. One of the things you mentioned, Anna, was you mentioned a reference when we were talking earlier, and I just want everybody to know that we'll be putting these slides up because there's a couple organizations you reference there. One is Neurodiversity in Business. One is Autism Society of our Minnesota. And then we have several other resources that you have put together. And thank you for that list. I will put that up there because what I find is that we need each other. And a lot of the resources out there are people who have either suffered themselves or their family members. And a lot of the resources are inspirational. And I think that's important to give people hope as well.
Absolutely.
Oh, hi, Sue from Walla Walla. I see she's listening right now.
Yep. I was just about to say that. It's my Aunt Sue. She's been a big proponent of the show. Aunt Sue has always cared about her Christopher, but I wanna thank her for always tuning in every week, and no matter the subject, supporting the show.
Anna, can you tell me what is different about women and girls? You mentioned that we don't always have some of the is it symptomology like in autism that or we have different
Sure.
symptomology?
Sure. So I think the first thing to know is as the diagnosis of autism kind of was created, the people that were studied to develop that criteria were all white men or white boys. So by just natural research, right, the
Mm-hmm.
characteristics are kind of written based on who was studied to determine that, which are white boys. So in terms of the kind of meeting that criteria, a lot of our people that are the people that diagnose are really trained to look for those common characteristics. Um, and with women, sometimes those might show up differently, or they might seem more normal, or they might are what we've been talking about. These characteristics might be masked because they've learned to hide them. So a common thing with autism is you might have a special interest, something that you have, you talk endlessly about, or you have excessive knowledge about, and with a lot of times it's trains, or it's anime, or it's
Are
Star
you going to raise
Wars.
your hand on trains there, Chris?
That's
So
all
kind
I've
of
been talking about lately.
it's kind of the stereotypical things. And with girls or women, a lot of times it's horses or animals or things that people would be like, oh yeah, that's completely normal. Um, but or typical. And what they don't know is like, oh, well, they know like every single horse breed and can like reference this, and they've read
Right.
37 books on it, right? Like that depth of knowledge, where on the surface it might seem like it's a very typical thing, but as you ask more questions, it might not be. So I
It's
think
almost like, oh my God, whoa, like you could have a PhD in that.
exactly. I
Right.
think that's one of the reasons, Adrian, you referenced how employees can be extremely productive and sometimes do the work of 2 or 3 people. And I think when it's that special interest matches a workforce need is really where you can
Mhm.
see that, where you truly have that passion for a subject. So those are some common things you see. Also, I think sometimes traits of autism might be seen as more like socially acceptable as like gender norms for women, right? So if you're not comfortable in social settings or communicating or talking, kind of that public speaking aspect, as a woman, it's much more socially typical to be more quiet, to be more in the background, where that just might not even be noticed, because it is more socially acceptable from a gender standpoint. But again, it's kind of based on that. Boys were studied, boys are what the criteria is developed on, and not everyone is trained to kind of ask those second level questions or kind of dig maybe a layer deeper to see if there's more to it.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. Because you're going to have gender differences, you may have racial differences, you may have, and
Yes. It's interesting you say that, Adrian. Also, autism is also oftenly misdiagnosed. So, in people of color who are autistic, it's actually common for them to be misdiagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder, and with women, they're more likely to be misdiagnosed with anxiety and depression. And those things can certainly co-occur with autism, but those groups are much more likely to be misdiagnosed. Likely due to stereotypes and
I
unconscious bias.
yeah, I have that experience with my attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Is that I was always, believe it or not, a pretty quiet kid and struggled in silence. I don't think anybody really paid attention because I had like, as far as like authority figures and certainly through grade school, no problems with oppositional defiance. But, my brother who had ADHD, bless his heart, real severely and had dyscalculia, dyslexia, a lot of things that were never even appropriately diagnosed. He suffered tremendously, but he did have more of the acting out behavior. So what happens in yeah, well, that's not a good thing. At the same time, those children may be more likely to get diagnosed or get diagnosed at a younger age
Yep,
even.
exactly.
And so how did you were mentioning, and I was thinking about this when you talked about, first of all, great for you. Theodore Roosevelt would say, bully for you for sticking with 6 months of testing, right? And that's a lot. You had a lot of different feelings. But when you were given the diagnosis, what were your emotions at that time? That's one question. And another question is, who did you disclose that to first?
Sure. So I think my immediate kind of reaction, again, I largely credit this to the person who did the testing with me. I think she was exceptionally talented at what she does, and just kind of that validation that she provided. Really, the first emotions I felt was relief. I just felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Like it had answered so many things in my life. So really just utter sense of relief, a weight had been lifted. I actually don't remember the exact first person I told. I know I probably sent a couple texts, to some family and some close friends and things like that. And I remember I wasn't scheduled to go into work that day, but I have a super supportive boss who's kind of supported me throughout this. And I ended up going into work, so I wanted to talk to her in person and kind of share the news and just my sense of relief. So I remember wanting to share that with her and to get her support on that. So that was a really good feeling to just have that answer and have that support. And I don't know if you want me to expand kind of on where it went from there in disclosure, if
Yes,
you have any other
I do.
follow-ups.
I do, because what also really amazes me about you is you didn't stop there. So you've taken your own discovery and expanded that to make a positive difference in the lives of other people that you work with, and even it's going to be in the lives of students. And that's impacted me because you started an employee resource group, and then you and I were talking, and I disclosed to you and joined the group. So yeah, I'm not even quite sure how that, like, how did you sit down and go, I'm going to form this group?
Sure.
Before
Well,
we
it started kind of
continue,
by, or go ahead. Yeah.
before we
Go ahead.
continue on here, I just want to let our viewers know that we had a technical difficulty with Blog Talk, so we're actually only on StreamYard right now, and we're coming up on probably around 8 minutes. So the nice thing about StreamYard is we can keep this going as long as we want. It's up to you ladies when how long we want to continue. I'm fine with going as long as it takes us to get this done. So.
All right. So Adrian, back to your question. So a couple points. So the first is I'd shared kind of as I started suspecting might be autistic. I'd shared with some colleagues that I knew had some expertise or knowledge in that area. They were super supportive and ended up some of them disclosing their own neurodiversity to me. So as I was kind of going through my journey of self-discovery, I was kind of identifying and learning about others in the workplace. I think I was up to about 4 people that I knew were also autistic or neurodivergent. So I knew there was a population of people like me in the workplace. But really, I'd say the most critical and important aspect of this, and I think anyone listening to this who's in any leadership position, if you hear one thing tonight, hear this. When I was kind of going through, hadn't been diagnosed yet, but I had my first kind of introductory thing. I was in that 30-day period of that roller coaster ride of am I autistic, am I not? And I was having a conversation with one of our senior leaders, and I felt compelled, like I need to share with this person that what I'm going through and that I think I'm autistic. And I didn't know why. I just had this feeling of like I need to share this. And I did, and I shared with that leader that I suspected I was autistic and how I saw that impacting me at work. And that person's response, as the number one reason that kind of put everything else in motion. And I couldn't quote for you exactly what the words that they said were, but I can describe to you how their words made me feel. And their response made me feel like, Anna, that is amazing. Being autistic is amazing. That is like amazing to hear that. And their response was affirming. It was positive, which wasn't necessarily what I was expecting. I kind of felt like, and I even told the senior leader this, of like, I feel like if I share this with people, or if I am autistic and I share that I would be committing career suicide, right? For people to know that about me. So that senior leader's immediate and like complete support was critical. And that same person followed up with me later and was like, Anna, like I've been thinking more about that. Like it makes me sad to like know that that's how you feel. And we've had multiple conversations since then. I just had felt immense support from that senior leader. So knowing that I had support like that in the organization was the number one biggest reason why I did anything after that. If that leader would have responded any differently, we would not be where we are today. I do not believe we'd have an employee resource group or kind of anything that went from there.
A great point. They always say it comes from the top down in the organizations. Yeah.
Adrian, actually, you have a question. This comes to, she's not watching our show online, but she's actually looking at me. It's my wife. So this question comes from Nikki, and she's a daycare teacher. She takes care of preschool kids. And her question is, how do you explain to kids kind of what's going on? She deals with a lot of kids that may have neurodivergence, and the really hard thing is when you're in a teaching role like that, because it's happened to me. I was a swim instructor for a number of years, and you can't really go up to the parent and say, well, I think your kid has this, or XYZ, because you don't have the letters behind your name that let you make that
yeah, that's a good point. You also have to be careful because you may, like, I know when I was teaching in elementary school, they said when you recommend something, it has to go through a process because the school district may end up paying for it. So you don't know what you're offering, know why you're offering it. It's almost like get the counsel of the people that you work with too.
Well, and another part of this question, I think what she's trying to get at is there are some people that don't tell their kids that they have autism.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are working with a child and maybe the parent hasn't disclosed to the center that, okay, this child has autism, but it's blatantly obvious to the teachers that the kid is neurodivergent, how would you go about dealing with a child that maybe is a problem child and you can't, say,
Mm-hmm.
really, you can't approach it? How would you deal with it without letting them know that they're autistic?
I know from being an elementary school teacher, a lot of what we did in those circumstances was we used literature. And there's a lot of child authors who will break down, it may not be like, here's a book on Suzette on autism, but it may be like, here is a book on waiting your turn in line, or here is a book on when things are difficult for your emotions. And so I think children's literature is one way. If you have a school psychologist, talking to them about it. But I think you brought up the good point, Christopher and Nikki, as well, is that you're honoring confidentiality. Mm-hmm. And at the baseline, and this is something Anna has worked with at school, is that we're all going to uphold confidentiality for people who don't want to disclose for whatever reason. And I know it's really hard as a parent. Do you disclose that or do you not disclose it? When do you disclose it? Do you disclose it to the child, the teachers? There's so many decisions coming at you.
The biggest thing in the anonymity and not being able to tell is, say there's a situation where maybe that autistic child acts out and hurts another child. You're not allowed to go to the child's parents that got hurt and said, oh, well, it was an autistic child that hurt your child. They're not allowed. Well, teachers really aren't allowed to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I would add that I think education about autism and neurodiversity from a young age is important, both for students, for educators. So collectively as a society, everyone learns
Mhm.
more about it. So as we're interacting with people, we have more of a base knowledge of that to begin with. And that starts in elementary school.
And let me just say, hurrah for Nikki, because I know she's such a caring teacher, and she could have 10, 12, 14 kids in a room,
Mhm.
and you know, two of them might have autism. And um, it's difficult because I think you want to stop and be able to like give that individual attention and explain things that you can't explain. So I guess there's no easy answer to that. I do like the education, especially with kids, about your, appropriate behaviors, body space, not touching
Mhm.
other people, but also about not teasing.
Right.
Um, whether it's somebody who has a condition or not, kids get, I think, brutally teased sometimes. And I know her center and they don't tolerate that, but
Right.
some of us grew up with that trauma.
Mhm. Well, we're at about an hour here. I was thinking I was going to tell a story about when I was an instructor, and then we can do final thoughts and close out if that works for you, ladies.
Sure.
So, for years, I was about 6.5 years. I was a lifeguard and a swim instructor, and I split my time. So, usually in the morning at about 4:45, I'd show up to work and do my tasks that I needed to do to open the pool, test the pH, do whatever I needed to do. Then I would open the pool to the members at about 6 o'clock. Um, and I was done with my morning routine at about 8:30. So I could go ahead and do whatever I wanted until probably 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, where I'd come back and I'd be a swim instructor for a couple of hours. And I was teaching they were probably around third, fourth graders. And I had a class probably at about 10 or 12. Um, and I happened to have one kid that was on the autism spectrum. And Steve was always on his feet. He always kept me laughing. But the funny thing is one day I was working with him, and if you weren't directly working with a child, they had to be um, with their arms on the wall and standing. And usually at this grade level, they could reach the bottom of the pool. So feet on the bottom of the pool, hands on the side, and just hanging there. Um, so I was working with another child, and I was bringing this child back to the wall, and I was kind of saw that Steve was moving around and he was laughing. Well, I was putting this child back on the wall, and I just glanced down, just to make sure that everybody's feet was on the bottom of the pool. And Steven's swim trunks ain't around his waist; they're down around his ankles. I was like, "Hey, Steven,
Yeah.
so yeah, this is kind of like my living room. Can you pull your swim trunks up?" He goes, "What for? Don't need them." And it was just
Which is a true thought. I mean, and
right to him. To him, he didn't need them because he wasn't swimming. And
mhm.
the funny thing about people with autism is they are brutally honest to a T.
Well, they can be. And I know, Anna, you had published something sent to us at school about uh, law and how people with autism can be really good about um, being honest, but also having like the integrity and the legal part of it,
Mhm.
Sense of
which,
justice. Yep.
yeah, sense of justice.
Mhm.
And I love it that, I mean, I don't know. I just kind of love this thought that there's there's people out there that have a brain that doesn't lie well, or, like, awesome. Like if you ever watch the show, Doc Martin, he's a little brutally honest at times, but they kind of treat his character as he's a physician, and he was practicing in London as a surgeon, but he got a blood phobia, and he transferred out to Cornwall. Yeah. And so he goes there with this blood phobia, but he's on the spectrum. And so it's like, he's brilliant. He saves a lot of lives, but in doing so, he kind of like, the community's not too happy with him because he doesn't like do tea for everyone, or, really get into the social part.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, Adrian. So I have something to add. I'm going to give a little background first. So I want to mention what our first employee resource group meeting was like. But prior to that, so I know I had shared, and felt support from the organization. As I, had disclosed to people, I started learning more people in the workplace who were autistic or neurodivergent, which kind of led to the thought of, starting that employee resource group. So as we started forming that group, making it official, sending communications, every communication we send out saying, hey, here's an upcoming meeting. If you're interested, here's the process to join. Every email we send out, we get at least one additional person that wants to join the group. And I think we're around 30 members right now. So there's a lot of neurodivergent people, certainly in our workplace, and probably in a lot of workplaces, whether we realize it or not. But the interesting thing, as we had our first meeting, the first couple of meetings, but I remember the first meeting specifically, I think there was like 5-6 people in that meeting. And I just remember how freely we could all talk. I didn't have to be in that sense of trying to process 17 different things on each conversation. And I just remember all of us in the room saying what we meant, meaning what we say, and we could just have an honest conversation without all of that added worry. What are they going to say? What are they going to think? I just remember leaving that meeting feeling I've never felt so understood before. I've never felt like I can understand other people so clearly. And I felt like we were all communicating and talking the same language. And I'd never in my life felt that before until that employee resource group started to meet and I started connecting with other colleagues like that.
That is amazing. The other thing I want to pause and just say thank you, Anna, because I do talk about my age and like one of those people, like I'm 63 and I can come out as a grown ass woman and tell people I'm neurodivergent and I'm okay with it. But that has not been the history of my life. I have not been comfortable with that until you started this group. And also what I don't know if I've shared with you, I think I have, that it's given me, like Brene Brown, where she talks about vulnerability and taking risks. It's given me the courage to tell my college students that I'm neurodivergent. And the amazing thing is the connectivity there with them, whether they are neurodivergent or not, all of them have responded very well. And, as a college instructor, whether you're a college instructor or you're a physician or you're whatever you are, 30 or 40 years into it, you can be really feel vulnerable, like I can't share that. And if any of you have had the imposter syndrome in your life, a lot of us who are neurodivergent get that syndrome where they're like if people really knew, they'd say, well, you can't teach college. If they really knew who you were, what are you doing teaching college? But yet you've had all these accomplishments and you're very competent to do what you're doing, but you've got this imposter syndrome, right? So I got to say it's been freeing and giving up that imposter syndrome, being able to come out and say, yeah, I'm neurodivergent. It's great. And there's some real strengths with that. Yeah, there's some challenges, believe me.
Yep.
And look, I've got friends.
Yeah. Adrian, it's so interesting you mentioned Brene Brown because I was reading her, was it Daring Greatly, or her main one about vulnerability kind of as this process. And one of her quotes, it was like, courage begets vulnerability or vulnerability begets courage. And I remember I read that around the time I was, do I disclose? Do I not disclose? And I remember that book, that her research really being instrumental in me feeling like, no, like I need to do this. And what I've noticed, and you and I have talked about this as well as other members, is when one person takes that step and does that, it makes it easier for everyone else coming after you. And also in our work specifically with students, I've certainly had my own journey in how do I disclose, how do I not disclose, and what really the main reason that I've decided, like, yes, it's important for me to disclose regardless of any repercussions or any negatives that might come from it. Really the positives outweigh those negatives. And for me, that's the impact it can have on our students and their success. And I'm finding every day I'm interacting with students now that I'm open about my autism and my neurodivergence, that then they share their challenges. And it's every day I'm interacting with students and they're sharing their challenges with me. And I'm able to say, oh, yeah, I can relate to that. I've been there too. I had a student tell me, Anna, you're the only person in this world I've ever been able to relate to. And that was as a result of conversations around autism. So I think in roles like ours, and anyone in a professional role, to be vulnerable and to share that, the impact that can have on other people is so important. And I will say too about disclosure, I kind of fumbled through that at first because I really, I just remember, some of the first people I told, some of the people that knew me the best didn't even believe me when I told them I was autistic.
Oh yeah.
And that was hard for me because I'm like, like who I am, that I wouldn't say something unless I'd thoroughly researched and whatnot. And I still have people that don't believe that I'm autistic in my life that know me really well. And something I noticed too is I had to kind of learn how to disclose in a way that was easy for other people.
That's an art in and of itself.
Exactly. I remember when I started, I would just be like, "Oh yeah, I'm autistic," and then just like dead silence, awkward silence, like. And what I learned from that, because I remember like talking with my mentors about it and being like, "No one's responding in a supportive way, like no one's saying." Right. And then I remember my mentor being like, Anna, like these people want to support you. They just like don't know what to say. Like that's kind of a bombshell to drop. And then like, so what I've learned is, how do I bring this up organically and like keep talking so it's not like doesn't require a response. So what I do now is just if there's a natural segue, I'll kind of mention it in passing, or oh yeah, I'm autistic, and because of that X, Y, and Z, and then kind of keep the conversation going so that I can share that information without kind of putting the other person.
I love that. I had to laugh when you said that because I just picture myself because I don't always have the greatest discernment, So you'd be at the, soda fountain or getting a Pepsi out of the can and see some teacher you don't know that well. Hi, I'm Adrian. I'm ADHD,
Exactly. And I found especially, I find it helpful, like to bring that up in a context when you can do it in a positive manner. So something I haven't shared. So one of the criteria for diagnosis is you have to like have symptoms or signs from childhood. So one of the criteria that eventually got me my diagnosis, I am like obsessively over the top organized to the point when I was a kid, I would purposely mess up my room just so I could clean it. I would like daydream about how I could like organize Legos, like if I just get like plastic tackle boxes, like over the top organized. So one of the things I do is if the topic of organization is coming up or my organization skills, I'll try to tie that up like, oh yeah, like I'm hyper organized. One of the reasons I'm autistic, it's my special interest. So I try to, when possible, bringing it up in a way that it can be a positive thing and then continue the conversation on. I found to be a much more helpful way to disclose, especially for the person I'm sharing that with, rather than just saying I'm autistic and then letting them.
I love it. Yeah.
Well,
it's learning how to talk about it. Yeah.
Before we end it here, I wanted to, it was funny you mentioned that, Anna, about the hyper organization. And it's funny earlier that you mentioned trains because I'm into model trains and I'm into model trains big. And the thing that makes me laugh is I have a couple of old two-door file cabinets that are underneath my N-scale layout. And that's basically what happens is I have everything organized, but I have my steam locomotives on one side and I have my diesel locomotives on the other side, but that's not enough. they're broken down by what class of diesel engine they are and what class of steam locomotive they are
Mhm.
and what their job is.
Mhm. There you go. And I'm sure you had a lot of fun organizing them in that way as well, and it was a nice process.
Yeah. And,
Yep.
I remember you had a friend in high school. Well, we won't name his name just because we haven't asked for permission, but he's a great guy. And you came home and you said, Mom, Dustin said, oh, there you go. And his initials are Dustin. Forgive me, Dustin. Mom, Dustin said, I can't talk about World War II anymore. That's it. He's tired of hearing it. I said, what did you say? He said, well, you know what I told him? I said, what? You go. I told him, you can't talk about sports anymore. And I said, well, Sierra, what are you going to talk about? And you're like, I have no idea, because you were both hyper focused on those things.
Well, and the funny thing is he is autistic himself, so it's that's been a big our relationship together has been a trial and error on how
you guys used to irritate each other, yeah.
How do two neurodivergents stay friends for this long and not be at each other's throats?
It's interesting you say that, CR. And before I have something to share on that, and before I do that, I just want to give credit. I've worked with some really amazing therapists that have helped me develop a lot of these skills that I have and have helped me learn this. So huge shout out and thanks to the therapists that I've worked with. What I learned from one of them in regards to like conflict with people. So if you're neurodivergent versus neurotypical. So if I'm autistic, I'm very likely, if I'm working with someone else who's autistic, we'll probably see things the same way or be able to like relate on some note, right? So we kind of understand how people think. And if I'm working with someone who's neurotypical, even if I don't understand them or understand how they're thinking, I still generally know what to expect from someone who's neurotypical. So actually, and this is what I learned recently, was that a real big challenge can be if you're different types of neurodivergent or have different mix. So if I'm autistic and I'm working with someone who's ADHD, well, they're not autistic like me, so I can't relate on that, and they're not fitting into the neurotypical realm that I know what to expect. It's something completely different, and I have no idea how to respond to that or how to work with that. So I've learned recently that's actually where a lot of conflict can happen, is because you don't know what to expect or how to work with that. So it's really interesting you mentioned that.
That's the thing that I'm really enjoying right now, is the learning, because, even as a teacher with a special education background, you think well, I know about this or that. And when you start reading about it, you're just like, oh my gosh, it is like there's so much out there now.
Absolutely.
Well, I think we've had a good show so far. I hate to put the brakes on it, but I think what I'd like to do, if you ladies would like to at some point, is reschedule another episode. And we can go a little further in depth on more things that we wanted to cover.
Well, Anna, you have been delightful. I just can't thank you enough. It's so fun.
Thank you for coming on.
It is my pleasure. I enjoy this conversation. Love this topic, and I also want to credit Adrian. You were one of the first people too, as I kind of started disclosing, and some of the things you shared with me that you shared tonight, right, about how what I did impacted you. Like that also gave me courage and helped me see how, wow, like this is impacting other people. So your response to my disclosure was also a huge part of continuing to disclose and continuing to see the value in that, and how that can impact others. So I just want to thank you, Adrian. Yes, thanks, CR, for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Well, thank you for coming on, and we'll be in touch, and maybe we can throw together another episode on this, because like I said, one 60-minute session, well, a minute and 20 or hour and 20-minute session on this topic isn't enough. We've barely scratched the surface on it, so maybe we'll go ahead and we'll do another another episode at some point in time. But
We'll probably, Anna and I, we have done some research CR2 on some of the UK members and some of the people that have taught us, and so we can maybe invite some of them on too
right,
sometime.
that would be interesting.
They're amazing. They really are. Like, and I said, Anna, when I first heard looking at this, I'm like, everything I pull up in Google, it's like UK, Britain.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, I thought, wow, they're so progressive. And then we do have places, Stanford and Harvard, I'm sure. I think they have programs. We have some good people on this side of the pond too. So
Absolutely.
Yep. Well, I just wanted to thank you, ladies, and we'll go ahead and I just wanted to tell our listeners and remind our listeners that there will not be a show next Friday. That's because next Thursday at 7 p.m. CST, we are talking to Father Lampert, who is a Catholic exorcist. Whether you do or do not believe in that, or that's not your religion, feel free to listen anyway. There's probably going to be some good lessons to learn in there, and some good things that Father Lampert might say. Who knows? He might reach somebody during our show. So that is next Thursday at 7 p.m. CST. That is Father Lampert, who is a Catholic exorcist. And again, ladies, I wanted to thank you for coming on tonight. And we will go ahead and schedule another show for another time. Until then, folks, stay safe, and we will talk to you all next Thursday. Have a great night.
thank you, Miriam, for the heart. Thank you for listening in, everyone.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye.